But of course, the issue here today that we're gathered to talk about is broadband. And I want to share with you a few thoughts about that and a few comments about what the city of Albuquerque is working on. But of course, I also want to start out by, you always have to recognize some of your peers in the room that, at least if you can, and I think we have the mayor of Jal here, Mayor Aldrich. Give us a wave. Thank you for being here, Mayor. And thank you. I made it to JAL when I was state auditor, so I got that under my belt. And also Mayor Torres from Bernalillo, of course, our neighbor. Mayor, give us another wave. Mayor Torres, back there in the back. Thank you, Mayor. So I know there are lots of other folks in the room from different capacities, whether it's concerned citizens or other local government officials, representatives from different organizations. Thank you all so much for coming this morning. And of course, I get to introduce our senator a little bit later, but let's just quickly acknowledge the person who brought us all together. Senator Tom Udall, thank you for all that you do. Now, I want to begin with a little bit of a story that doesn't have anything to do with New Mexico, other than broadband. When I was born and raised in Albuquerque, and I went away to school, and I found myself one day living in Cambodia, of all places, a faraway country. And I lived there for 3 years. And the amazing thing about it, I moved to Cambodia in the year 2000, and I helped start an organization called Digital Divide Data, which has to do with the digital divide. But besides that point, the amazing thing was, in the year 2000, I was able to go to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, population about 1 million people. There's only 5 million in the whole country. And I was able to get wireless, high-speed internet in year 2000 in Phnom Penh. It was line-of-sight based. Actually, the US government had built it with our taxpayer money. It's part of the USAID program. But the amazing thing about that, I was able to build the country's first ever IT company off wireless internet in Cambodia, right in the year 2000. That's how good the bandwidth was. That's how good the internet was. And this was, you know, making modest websites and databases, nothing fancy at all. But I was able to do it faster in Phnom Penh, Cambodia than I could even probably today in the middle of Albuquerque, let alone rural New Mexico. I share this story with you because of obvious reasons. This is how far America and New Mexico still has to go. We are in a situation where there are some technology reasons, of course, and since this is a technology-oriented thing, you know, there's no mountains in Cambodia. That's one reason why they could have line-of-sight wireless internet. And there's also no tall buildings. So, you know, there are some reasons why we can't just replicate some of these other models that we see around the country or around the world. But I want to highlight that because that was, I mean, now that was right 19 years ago that was available. So I like to remind folks that it's not necessarily about technology. It's about all the things that we wrap around it. It's about the policies that we produce. It's about the investments that we make and how we prioritize what we're doing. And then fundamentally, it's also about leadership, which is why it's so important that our U.S. senators brought us here together. So I'm trying to take a little bit of what I learned from that and try and apply a little bit of it in Albuquerque. We're doing that in 3 ways. The first one is almost the exact same concept. We are turning up the strength of the wireless internet in all our community centers so that you can basically just get it for free in the neighborhoods near community centers. And this is one of these, I think, small ideas that it's a nice thing for folks who already live there, but I actually want this to eventually be the norm. And as strengths get stronger, you know, living next to a community center should be an asset. If it means you get free internet too, I'm fine with that. I think that's actually a good thing. So we're going to experiment with this concept of just trying to do little things like that all around the community. But we're going to pair that with some other ideas. We are, how many of you have heard of the ART project? Anyone? Everyone's favorite. Long story there. Here's some good news about the ART project. When we did that project, underneath it, we actually laid dark fiber up and down Central, around Route 66, all up and down the city. And we are now going out to bid to try and find ways for Albuquerque to be its own internet service provider, to lease out that broadband space as far as we can around Central. Thanks for that. So you must be applying for the RFP. No, just kidding. So we're going to see if this is another experiment, right? Can the city of Albuquerque actually get in the internet business? We have the hardware to do it. We're going to see if we can get the right providers together to do it so we can offer sort of, Route 66 high-speed broadband to everyone within, roughly half a mile of Central. So that's another project we're working on. And so for us, I think the third thing is just to remind folks that this is still an important issue. And while I'm fortunate enough to represent the city of Albuquerque, as a former state senator and as state auditor, I'm very well aware of the challenges in rural New Mexico, which while we have equivalents of that, whether it's the South Valley or the International District, where we have essentially dark areas of Albuquerque when it comes to high-speed broadband, or large swaths of our state, whether it's out in Indian country or in rural New Mexico, we have so many challenges when it comes to broadband. But the good news is our state legislature has stepped up, our governor is doing a lot to help, and we have a leader on this in our U.S. Senate. And so I would like to begin by sharing a little bit about our Senator Tom Udall, who we have known in many ways throughout his career, and now as our state senator, 2 decades of public service in New Mexico. That is awesome. For those of you maybe a little newer to the state, former Attorney General, former U.S. House Rep, and now reelected to his 2nd term to the U.S. Senate, Tom has always been a strong advocate when it comes to New Mexico, working families in New Mexico and also rural New Mexico. And he's been able to pair that with a deep care and concern and thoughtfulness for the environment, healthcare, veterans, and also technology. And so Tom is the one, Senator Udall, sorry, Tom has brought us all here together. And I'm grateful to him for his leadership and for all we're going to be able to discuss and work on today, and for truly representing all that is New Mexico in every way, from every geographic part of the state and for every type of person in this great state. Thank you, Senator Udall, for bringing us together, and I want to welcome you to the stage. Let's give a round of applause.
Tim, thank you very, very much for that very kind introduction, and I think it was a wonderful way for you to kind of introduce the conference, because talking about your experience in Cambodia and then what you're doing here in Albuquerque, so thank you so much. You've been a friend and partner and somebody I've worked with for a long time, and I just want to say to you, thank you for really getting our city moving and keeping it moving in the right direction. We really appreciate that. Let's give him a big round of applause. I mean, really, really. You know, Tim, and we first names here, okay? None of this Senator Udall and everything. When I go out in the parades, I tell a story about, in the punchline ends with, "Call me Tomas no mas." Sometimes my opponents reverse it and say, "No mas Tomas," but we usually get over that. We've won most of the elections in recent times, so we're not worried about that. But let me just build off one of the things that Tim said that I think is so important. He talked about trying to make sure that everybody in our state has internet. And one of the things that really hits me is the idea, and what the wonderful group here, every time we do one of these, it just explodes. I mean, people come out of the woodwork. We have a lot of tribes represented, great rural people here. It's just absolutely amazing the interest that's out there. And so I thank you so much for coming out, and I know the energy's here, and we're going to try to give you the very, very best program. But in terms of getting everybody connected, what kind of priority do we want to put this on? I think Tim hit it at the top, that this needs to be a very, very top priority. And to me, historically, when I look at America historically, I say there were a couple of big infrastructure projects that pulled us all together and created us as a country. First of all, most of you know that are longtime New Mexicans, And we're in this area before we even had New Mexico, territorial times, back with my grandmother and things like that. We were very isolated up until the 1880s. People that raised their cattle or farmed or whatever, the markets were only nearby. But when the railroads came in the 1880s, a national project, all of us were connected, and the marketplaces expanded for the wonderful Southwest, and it expanded across the country. One of the things we saw, too, when we got a little further down the line in the 1930s, and we had FDR as president, he said, you know, we have a lot of our rural areas that aren't connected and don't have any electricity. And so he introduced a big national program and said, we're going to do rural electricity because we want everybody in the country to have electricity because it's that important. It's so important to our growth and to our infrastructure. And then you saw Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s with the interstate highway system. And so those are the kinds of projects when we think about getting broadband and getting internet. Tim, thank you so much. Thanks for staying around for a little bit. I know you're very busy. Cheers. Give him another round of applause. He goes out the door. Yeah. So that to me is the kind of thing that the kind of importance I put on it is way up there in terms of getting us all connected. And that's why I think that we've seen this incredible turnout today. You know, I was shaking hands across here, tribal members, people from rural areas I haven't seen for a while, old friends that are coming in and say, you know, thank you so much for doing this. So thank you. We really, really appreciate your energy, and we're going to try to make this something that you just, you love, and you gain a lot. You gain a lot of information, and you come out of here kind of thinking out of the box to get your communities connected and get broadband into them. So, and let me say as we finish the legislative session up in Santa Fe, it's really important, as I observe that, to always remember our rural areas and our less populated areas. To me, those areas are the heart and soul of New Mexico. So that's tremendously, tremendously important. Now, we know the statistics in New Mexico on broadband. In terms of broadband access, New Mexico is ranked 48th in the country. And that's according to the U.S. Census report that happened in December. Only 73% of our homes in our state have access to broadband. So we cannot allow 1/4 of our households to be on the wrong side of the digital divide. And what that means is we're unable to access basic information for school, for work, participating in civic affairs, not able to access needed health care and social services, or get the right information to make informed consumer choices. Now, we have a great partner here today, and I just want to thank the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for sponsoring this summit. And I think one of the leaders here, we're going to see her later, but she's right over here. Karen, stand up so you can. Thank you for sponsoring with us, and thank you for all you're doing to get everybody connected. So let me just talk about a little. The digital divide is hurting rural areas, it's hurting tribal communities, and these are the very communities that we want to be fostering development in. So let's step back a second and take a look. Lack of access has a terrible impact on our students, and that's something that really was driven home to me. And talk a little bit about what happens with connectivity with students. They need it in their schools, they need it in their libraries, they need it in their homes, and we're trying to pass a bill to put Wi-Fi in school buses. Now, why did we come up with that idea? Well, I'm on the Commerce Committee, and we do oversight of the FCC. And there's this wonderful commissioner named Jessica Rosenworcel, and I brought her out to Las Cruces, and we tried to pull together a really great group of people to talk about internet connectivity and how it related to schools. And we did this at a school. And we heard this story from a young man by the name of Jason. And he was a big, strong guy. He played football, and he was an athlete from Hatch, New Mexico. We were in this little high school down there in Hatch. And he, as what Jessica talked about, what she calls the homework gap, which is the gap where if you don't have connectivity, students can't do their homework. They get the assignments at school, they have access at school, but they go home and they don't have access at home. And so we're talking about that, and Jason says, let me tell you something. He says, I'm a football player, and we've got a great team here, and we play all over the state, and we play in neighboring states. And do you know how long I ride school buses? And he was relating that to us. And then he says, at the end of the day, sometimes I get home from a game at 10 o'clock at night. He says, where do you think I go to do my homework? He goes over to the school where you have the expanded access, sits in his car at 10 o'clock at night to finish his homework. That's just not right, folks. We have got to get that connection, and that's where we came up with the idea here. He's riding a school bus a long distance into school. He's riding school buses when he goes to sporting events, and so that's a bill we're working on, and it's a bipartisan bill. We have a Republican on it. You may not believe that in Washington, that Democrats and Republicans work together, but we do that a little bit every now and then. So let me also say that our federal agencies are an essential partner, and I push for robust funding for programs that have success that you all work with every day. Let me just go through a couple of those. The E-rate program, the Connect America Fund, Community Connect grants, distance learning and telemedicine grants, and telecommunications infrastructure loans. So all of those, and when we talk about loans, Terry Bruner's here. You're going to hear from him at some point, and you should visit with him. He did that USDA job, so that's an important, all these federal agencies and these grants are so important to move us forward. So we have some, and you're later going to hear from the NTIA and the USDA on federal resources, and Terry did that job for 8 years, and so he's always a good guy to pull aside and ask him what his thoughts are. He once again is trying to push the idea that, and I really believe this, there's a lot of money at the federal level that's in various programs that we don't get just because we don't take the effort to fill out a grant and push it. And our congressional delegation helps you endorse that application and say, we want you to get that money. So we have panelists here today from the whole spectrum, pardon the pun there, from many different agencies, from the telecommunications industry, from schools, from clinics and co-ops and tribes. And the real key to making adequate broadband a reality for every New Mexican is working together, understanding and tapping into all of the available resources, thinking outside the box. I want us to do that a lot today, and creating new opportunities. So what this summit, if you walk away with nothing else, what this summit is all about is making connections here so that we can connect to Mexico. So thank you for being here, and it's now my pleasure to introduce a man with a very big job in this state of New Mexico. His name is Vincent Martinez, Secretary of the New Mexico Department of Information Technology. Secretary Martinez has a wealth of public service and private experience, and he's here today to discuss the future of broadband for our state. Secretary Martinez, welcome, and there he is over here. Come on up.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it very much, and Mayor Keller, appreciate being here today. And thank you for inviting me here today. I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to, let me change the slide here a little, to talk to you about the future of broadband in our great state. And as the Senator mentioned, my name is Vincent Martinez. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Information Technology. And with the time that I have today, I want to talk about my perception of broadband, take a look at the critical of broadband and the service delivery of goods and services to the state of New Mexico, and also talk a little bit about what DoIT is doing in terms of their priorities in broadband. So to start this off, I'm going to give you my perspective of the role of government and the mission of government, right? And so this starts off, I've had 3 years in state government, I have 31 years in private sector, and I had 2 terms in the House of Representatives. So in the House of Representatives, it's very interested because you start to look and think, you know, what is my role? I was the youngest rep at that particular time. And what is the role of government? And the speaker at the time gave this speech about access, and it just has resonated with me ever since. And really, if you look at the core, government's mission is really to provide access to public goods and services, and it's access in healthcare. I'm a pacer, so it's going to be hard for me to stand at this podium. It's access. No? Okay. Well, I can't do anything about that. But it's healthcare. There you go. All right. So and as we move forward, how do we look at these different approaches in order to make broadband not only in our community here in the metro area or along the Rio Grande corridor, but outside in rural areas a reality? So the future of broadband, let's talk about that. Things are just going to continue to grow, right? I mean, the demand for broadband is going to continue to increase. We're going to continue to see technology advance rapidly. It's just going to continue to be a higher demand for broadband in the state of New Mexico. I mean, and across the U.S., how many of you have at least 4 screens of apps, or were smart enough to consolidate them into folders? Into one screen, right? You know, if you have 4 screens or more, or you have that many consolidated in folders, you've been aptified. I mean, that's it. Don't know if it's a word, but it is today. So let's think about smart cities, smart cars, smart homes. I think I have 4 apps for my home, right? One to do the garage, one to turn off the lights, one to set the temperature. I mean, it's just becoming crazy. With sensors, with SCADA data, I mean, it's going to be continued. So the risk, we cannot take the risk here in New Mexico without investing in broadband. It's extremely important to be able to provide the access that we talked about earlier to governments, to rural governments, to every citizen in the state of New Mexico. It's going to be increasingly important. So let's talk about the future of broadband. In the state of New Mexico, we first talked about access, right? And so we have to begin to assess where those gaps are. So now we have access to healthcare. Now we have telehealth, right? We have access to education. We have online. There is so much going on in education right now. They're so dependent on internet access. I was just talking to our friends at Albuquerque Public Schools, asking if they have redundant ISPs. There's so much content that is provided to students. There's Chromebooks, there's MacBooks, there's iPads, there's tablets, there's everything you can think that the students are using today, right? So much content coming from the cloud. We need to start thinking about what do we do with redundant ISPs there. And we're starting to have discussions with some of the schools on how we can do that, right? So it's a great opportunity as well. In terms of justice, you know, we have 911 services that is turning into next generation 911, where you can send a video in or where you can text a 911 call. We're going to need to continue that. Judicial system is going to continue to modify with electronic signatures and everything else that's going on in that particular. Employment opportunities, remote workers. Now, you know, with broadband and our investments in broadband, we can bring about remote workers, the same opportunities in terms of education, through online education, to be able to provide them access to education, and the same opportunities whether you live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or in Mosquero, New Mexico, which is a population of 92, right? You're going to be able to offer the same opportunities, and we still need to be able to continue to make those investments. Let's take a look at what DoIT is looking at and doing in terms of some of our priorities in moving broadband forward in this state. One thing is that if we're going to have a sustained effort in broadband, is we need to have an Office of Broadband. We have an Office of Broadband and Geospatial initiatives within Do It. It's basically unfunded. We're working with DFA and with the Legislative Finance Committees to see in the interim if we can get some funding there for sustained funding. Some states have created a broadband authority. Again, taking the brain trust that's in this room, that's outside, higher education, private sector, and figuring out how can we prioritize these initiatives with any funding that we can potentially get. It's going to be extremely important as we move forward. And then sustained funding for rural broadband. And I know I only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. So, we need to make sure to have those efforts. This legislative session, we were able to get $10 million for rural broadband with a big effort from the governor and the support of the legislature. And so, if you look at $10 million, it costs $25,000 per mile to run fiber roughly. If you run it overhead, that takes it down probably to 20 or lower. So you try to think about it in those terms, and it's not really a whole lot that we can do. We have another $1 million for libraries. And so, yeah, we see it here, over there. So Do It will be working with the Department of Cultural Affairs to be able to prioritize that as well. And then we have what we've done with E-rate. E-rate's done a great job, right? 99% of the schools are connected. There's still a gap, and we need to identify that. And then there's still what I talked about earlier, is can we have redundant ISPs for all those schools? Because if you don't have ISPs and they go down these days, it's like a snow day. You might as well go home, right? And so we'll continue to work on that. I think there's also the efforts that we have in terms of, and I want to just sort of end on this story here. And leave you with this message. And this message is during my interview with the governor. And we talked about broadband. And I said, well, Governor, there might be areas where we can't get broadband. And she said, Vince, we need to strive for broadband everywhere, right? We need to strive for broadband everywhere. And so as we begin to, as the senator spoke earlier, that we need to think outside the box. We need to leverage all the funding that we have. I understand that there's 52 different sources of federal funding for broadband. There's through 17 agencies in the federal government. We need to identify those, work with our congressional delegation to identify those. We need to have a grant writer internal to do it so that we're making sure we're leveraging those funds. If we can turn that 10 million to 50 million to 20 million, then we can start to make a larger dent here. So I want to strive, I want to just leave you with the governor's words, and that is, let's strive for broadband everywhere. And we'll continue to do that here in the state of New Mexico. And I thank you for your time today.